Welcome everyone to this session on protecting youth mental health. My name is Fatima Azzouzi, and I'm a global shaper from the Casablanca hub in Morocco. So we are here to talk about mental health for a special population, which is youth. 2019 was time to act for youth mental health, and there were a lot of youth-related mental health activities and initiatives that we will talk about during our discussion. But 2020 is time to invest in mental health and scale those initiatives for even more impact. And that's what we want to focus this conversation on, in line with the theme of this annual meeting, which is stakeholders for a sustainable and cohesive world. And specifically here, we want to talk about an emotionally cohesive world and a mentally cohesive world. I would like to introduce our panelists here with us today. So I'd like to start with my fellow shaper from the Bangkok hub in Thailand, Amornthep Sachamuneewongse, Sanju. So Sanju has a lived experience with mental health, which led him to co-found Sati app, which he's going to talk to us about in a moment. We have with us Professor Jeremy Farrar, Executive Director of the Wellcome Trust, who announced at the last Davos big investment of £200 million in mental health. So we're going to talk about that as well. We also have with us Director Henrietta Fore from the UNICEF. And UNICEF has mental health as one of its 2 priorities this year, so we want to hear more about that. And we have with us Professor McGorry from Origin, Australia. So he has been working on youth mental health specifically for more than 30 years, since the late 80s, so it would be interesting to know about his perspective. I would also like to acknowledge one of the panelists who could not make it because she was not able to get her visa, and that is Grace Gatera, from a mental health advocate from Rwanda with a lived experience, specifically around trauma related to genocide. So I will read to you the message that she would like to send. Listen to us. Invest in us. Fund us. Fund our youth-led initiatives. Invest in early intervention mental health programs, especially on a national level. Please listen. So that was Grace's message. And actually, before we start the discussion, I would like us in the middle of this busy Davos week to just take 1 minute to recenter, since we're talking about mental health, and it's good to walk the talk. That's what we do as shapers. We like to have actions. So instead of just talking, let's start with just taking 1 minute to recenter. So if you're comfortable, you can go ahead and close your eyes with me. If you're not, you can keep them open. So we will just take 3 deep breaths. So deep inhale. Slow exhale. Deep inhale. Slow exhale. Deep inhale. Slow exhale. And check in with yourself and see how you feel right now. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So, Sanju, you're the representative of youth on this panel, so I would like to start with you and your story with lived experience. So tell us about that and how it led you to be a mental health advocate and what you did in this space, especially during the past year.
Hello, everyone. I've lived with major depressive disorder and schizophrenia for the past 4 years, and started in 2015. And then it went to the point where I was severely self-harming and having suicidal thoughts and hallucinating. And so by 2016, I was having up to 16 pills of antipsychotic, antidepressant, Xanax, and sleeping pills. But that wasn't enough for me to get better, so I had to go to the extreme of getting electroconvulsive therapy 36 times. it was getting better, but with all the meds that I was on, my weight gained by about 50 plus kgs from what it used to be. So we had to stop the ECT and start with the therapy again. A lot of us I live in a place where people don't really understand what mental health really is. So in 2017, because I was in a place where I couldn't talk to anyone, I couldn't express myself very much, I attempted suicide. I came out of the hospital this time, and then I flew away for a while. And then when I came back, I was again in the same place where people didn't understand what was going on. So 2018, before attempting suicide, I called the suicide hotline in Bangkok, and no one picked up my call. So I was put into hospital, came out, and then I was to put it mildly, I was very pissed off that no one picked up my call, and I thought that if my call wasn't being answered, then how many people out there calls are not being answered? So I decided to take action into my own hand. If the system is not working, then I just decided to create my own application that provides on-demand listening services. Yep.
Yeah, so thank you so much for vulnerably sharing that. I've heard that story many times, but it's always inspiring. So what did you do after that experience?
So I started doing a lot of research into mental health, especially in Thailand. We have shortages of psychiatrists. We have a very not affordable and not accessible mental health care in the country. We have a system where people are calling into the suicide hotline. 800,000 people called in 2018, and about just 20% were answered in 2018, and it wasn't being fixed, and it has been like that for so long. So I've started a campaign last year that was picked up as a national campaign called Heart with Ears to promote empathy and deep listening and active listening. And that is also what we as Shapers are doing with Friendship Bench and Inuka, where we're going to train 10,000 Shapers globally to become empathetic listeners and work in our own community as active listeners and pass on the knowledge to other people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So this is an example of a community-based, youth-led initiative to deal with youth mental health. I forgot to mention that this session is live streamed. So if you are following us online and using social media, you can share using hashtag WEF20 and also using hashtag Time to Invest for mental health. So I'm going to go to you, Director. And so UNICEF has set mental health as one of two priorities, the other one being climate change. So that's a bold move. So we'd love us to tell you why you think that is important now. And you've also recently organized the first conference on child and adolescent mental health. So you just heard the experience of Sanju as an individual experience, but UNICEF has maybe the farthest reach to youth under 18 and children. So how do you envision leveraging that access that you have for mental health, and what kind of solutions you are thinking to bring?
Well, these are wonderful questions, and they come out of these experiences. So what Grace said, invest in us, and what you're saying, it is invest in us and in our ideas and ways that we can reach out. So for UNICEF, that's what we're hearing from lots of young people. And as you know, we work in every country in the world. So some of them are in real humanitarian disasters. So that is one group of countries. There is another group that are in development. So they are at every stage, low, middle, and high income. And what strikes you is that children and young people are in need in all of these countries. It is not something that is one particular part of the world. It is not just that it's in low-income countries or just in high-income countries. It's ubiquitous. So we must address it. And so as we look at the world around us, what we are seeing is that about half of most of the mental health issues that come up are there by the time you're 14 years old, and maybe 75% by the time you're 10 years later, you're in your mid-20s. So if that's happening then we've got to catch it early. So what we do with children is very important. When we're in humanitarian situations, let's say it's South Sudan, we have lots of children who have been displaced by conflict. Some have become child soldiers, and many have been displaced from their homes. They need places of security, of being able to be centered, to have a chance to just think. Would they love to have somebody listen to them? They would. That is everywhere. But they just need that. when we go to other places, we are seeing that there are different kinds of needs. And there are young people who have cell phones. So we have one system called YouReport, another one that is online e-mental health. And this means that you can phone in, you can get someone to listen to you, and you can talk about whatever problems you see. Suicide is one of the top 5 reasons for death in the world, is very high among adolescents and young people. So the need is immense. We are seeing that the future is going to have to be composed around several themes. So that's what we're working on. One is that it's multidimensional. There's nutrition, there's obesity is on the rise among adolescents. So we started programs for adolescents. But your body image, drugs, what then happens when you're in these processes? Another one is breaking the silence, stopping the stigma and the discrimination. Many of the problems start in the schoolyards, in bullying, in violence, and violence online now, big issues. We've started something that Jeremy can also talk about, in which we want to try to help national governments in tracking who in their population has mental health issues, so that they can see what sorts of services that become public health services should be offered to various populations in various parts of their countries. So we'll be hoping to roll that out this year. It'll be part of the national health surveys, but I think it will be a very important part. And then lastly, the initiative the Schaefers have for the 10,000. Peer support is going to be very important for the future. Young people want to help other young people. It's on a wide variety of subjects. But whether you have just come back from being a child soldier, whether you are being reintegrated and you've been in Syria, you're now going back to a home that you may never have visited in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or another place, you want to talk to someone. And this is the time and the place that young people can help other young people.
Thank you so much for sharing those examples. So we have the youth-to-youth support, we have the multidimensional aspects. So most of the time, mental health is discussed in isolation. We feel like, okay, we have this topic for mental health, and there's a population of people who have mental illness. But it's really about every one of us. It's not about whether you have mental health or not. It's just, it's going to happen sometime. It just depends when that happens. So I think this is a good point for you, Professor Farrar, to speak about that multidimensionality. And the Wellcome Trust announced that £200 million investments. So what is the approach you plan to take compared to this states we have right now today?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's great to have had the words from Rwanda. I'm sorry she couldn't come, and personal experience, because if we don't put those voices at the heart of this, then we won't make the progress. And Henrietta said it, and we would all say it, that we're not starting from scratch. We'll hear in a minute there has been progress, but there has not been as much progress in this space as there has been in others. I come from an infectious disease background, but there has not been as much progress in the area of mental health over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And that's a scientific problem, it's a societal problem, it's an innovation problem, it's a funding problem, but it's also a problem within all of us, because I doubt if there's anybody in this room, I doubt if there's many people here at Davos this week who don't have some sort of personal experience of this, whether it's themselves, bravely sharing their stories with us, or brothers, cousins, nephews, nieces, whatever it is. It will affect all of us. I think that's our great opportunity, because it is not about something happening to people far away. Yeah. This is something happening to all of us. And if we could go forward by building a movement, and we're going to focus on young people's mental health, as you know, by building a movement that actually isn't about a research funding agency or an esoteric piece of research, but which actually is owned by the community who are driving it and affected by it mostly, then I think we would learn lessons from the movements of the last 20, 30 years that have really progressed. And of course, we all think of what happened in HIV and the progress that was made very quickly there. So I think our role, and Wellcome is absolutely committed to this. It's not just a 5-year play. This will be our focus area, along with climate change and infections, over the next 10, 20 years. So, yeah, we've put 200 million to it. We announced that last year. But that is nowhere near enough. And again, learning lessons, and there's some colleagues here who have been very involved in this. What we need to try and do is say we will do that, but that is a drop in the ocean unless we're able to bring lots of other people with us, to magnify that, to leverage it, to access new capital that we've not previously accessed, whether from industry or whether in ways of innovative financing. Victor Zau's there is leading a charge on bringing innovative financing into this. And lastly, I'd say that we absolutely need to break down the silos that the research community has built up over the last 20 or 30 years. I trained originally as a neurologist. You have neurologists, you have psychiatrists, you have people working on neuroscience and basic mechanisms of disease. That community's got to be brought together. At the moment, I'm not saying they fight each other, but at the moment they're fragmented in silos. And this is an area that's been not had enough funding. And generally when that happens, people go more into their silos, not less. The analogy somebody gave to me is if you work on basic science, if you work on terminal care, if you work in a hospital or a hospice, or you're giving advice to people in cancer, you all are proud to say, I work in cancer. We don't have that in the mental health arena. The psychiatrists talk often one language, the people with lived experience talk another, people in neuroscience talk another, biologists talk another. We've got to try and bring these together and say there is an opportunity for all of you here, and you'll be better if we work together than if we worked apart.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So that's the multidimensionality that we were talking about at a different level among professionals actually in the field. And thank you for sharing that. I am proud to work in mental health, which would be something that we would love to hear. So you touched upon also the importance of having a movement. In line with that, I would like to share that there is currently a global mental health campaign called Speak Your Mind. So this is the first locally started and globally united mental health campaign. So if you want to contribute, you can go to gospeakyourmind.org. And one way that you can help share the message is, as you may know, every 40 seconds, someone in the world dies by suicide. So you can share a 40-second video talking about the importance of this message. So, Professor McGorry, as I said, since the end of the 80s, you've been working on youth mental health. So you probably have learned something that you want to share with us. So we'd love to know what is it that you learned? What do you think are the messages we need to stick to, the approaches, and so on? Talk to us about Origin and what it's been doing recently in that space.
Thank you, Fatima. Well, I think you've heard some of the messages already.
Yeah.
Mental health used to be an us and them issue. As Jeremy just said, it's an us issue. It's all of us, and that's a big breakthrough, I think. And we're feeling it in the room today, aren't we? So that's one of the big things. And because we're focusing on young people, early intervention, as Henrietta said, is absolutely the key. And you could almost say that mental illness is the #1 health issue facing the world, in a health sense. And I think the World Economic Forum, helped to put it there because their report from 2011 showed the massive impact on society of mental illness. And we're realising now why that is, because it strikes early in the lifespan, as Henrietta said, 75% by 25. And the disorders that impact on adult life and sap the futures of people. It's premature death, but it's lost potential as well, undermining the energy of society. That's something that, if we tackle that and make that the #1 priority, which Wellcome has actually put it front and centre, which is great, as Jeremy just said, that's very, very important. I started off working in the old mental hospital systems in the 1980s when these terrified young people would be coming into hospital with their first psychotic episode, and they'd often would have been ill for a couple of years. They'd be treated as if they were in their 15th episode of schizophrenia, no hope. It was the only specialty in medicine which would extract hope from the patient at the first presentation. You're not going to get better, you won't have a normal life. All of those messages were given by psychiatry, traditional psychiatry, to the patients. It's nonsense, and we've been able to show, first of all, with psychosis, we could change the early course of these illnesses, even by deploying existing treatments much more carefully in a holistic way, looking at the whole person, not just the medication and the custodial aspects. That was the first wave of reform, from my perspective, which swept around the world with early intervention for psychosis. And that is a very major step forward, which still is not available to most people with psychotic disorders around the world, even in high-income countries. But we could see a bigger picture issue then, that the epidemiology of mental illness was such that if you wanted to change the course and affect the long-term outcome, you had to look at the transdiagnostically, as Jeremy was alluding to. These disorders do not fit neatly into categories in a DSM or an ICD. They evolve, and we've seen this with Headspace now in Australia. Yes. We've developed a primary care system in the last 15 years which has spanned the whole country. We have 105 integrated youth health platforms across the country. Federal governments, successive federal governments have supported this very, very strongly. It's been designed by local communities, coming back to Sanju's point, and by young people, co-designed by them. So it feels like a safe, trusted space and brand for young people. And about 15 other countries have embraced this model too now. So this is a very, very hopeful sign. It's not just about the treatments, it's about the culture of care and delivering a health system that delivers what is already known, not just new discoveries, but actually, you know, it's only a very small minority of people that get access to what we can already do in terms of helping them. And if you do that, you see recoveries every single day. You know, I see that. That's why I'm still optimistic, very optimistic. And I think we're on the cusp, actually. The fact that we're here today discussing it really indicates that. And so I'm very, very inspired. So great to be here.
Thank you for sharing that message of hope, because I think we all need this. There might be people watching us who are dealing with mental illness or mental health issues. So we want to say that it is possible to solve this. Now, how do we do this? Nobody can do that alone. So we need a multi-stakeholder approach. And I'd like to invite all of you, anyone who wants to share, who do we need? Who are the stakeholders we need to be parts of that discussion? Because today there might be some stakeholders who are already involved, but maybe some are not, are missing. So who are those people, so that we make a call to action to them today? Sanju, you want to share?
So I think we of course we need to have the youth at the table, because they're right now the one who is going through mental health the most globally. I think there's also a need for the government, for private sector to come in, because the report came out from SAP in the United States that 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Z leaving the workspace because of burnout, and we need to fix that. And one stakeholder that I don't really think people talk about is the media, because media can be the force to create weather effect, which is copycat suicide. So for example, in Thailand, there's no proper media literacy on how to talk about suicide or mental health. And sometimes they share too much through the news, where the next forced suicide that happened the same way that happened with that. So I think one very important group that we need to bring in is the media. To talk about mental health in the right way. Okay, so youth as a stakeholder, very important to have a seat at the table and be part of the conversation and designing any systems. Yes, go ahead. And it's also the way media uses languages, right? Because languages for mental health is very different in every part of the world. So for example, the word psychosis in Thai language is rokjit, but media tends to use the word rokjit as to mean pervert, you know, and then there was also another mental health activist who also took antidepressant, and she also gained a lot of weight, and the media wrote that this person took so much weight that she now looks like a bullfrog, but she's still pushing on mental health. So these are the sort of like stigma that should really be eradicated from the media, and it should be put in a more light that empower youth living with mental health to just speak out about what issues that they're having. Yeah. So media as a stakeholder, and definitely being culturally aware, because there is no one-size-fits-all in this discussion, and nobody, I think, has it figured out today how to solve this. So it's important to have global solutions, but make sure that they are tailored to the environments. Especially, if we talk about, for example, conflict zones, there are populations that have specific needs. So I'd like to take it to inclusion. So specific populations, as I said, in conflict zones, maybe gender-based violence, people with disabilities, refugees. So, I'm not sure if you want to share anything around the specific needs of those populations, and how, when designing global mental health systems, we don't forget about those and make sure that we tailor to their needs. Would you like to share something like that?
Yes, you are absolutely right. They are harrowing stories, and they are the sort that make you realize that as a world, we must do better about being humane, that our humanity makes a difference. So, when I was in Cox's Bazar, many of the Rohingyas that have fled there have witnessed violence to a level that they had never witnessed it before. So whether it was children or whether it was women. And it was that they would see their mother being killed or their sister, or that they would be defiled in public. So these images of horror were carried with them. We began putting them into safe spaces to place them in a place where they could talk to other children and that they could draw pictures. It's a way to bring out some of these feelings. But there is a need in any of these times for just a person to feel safe. And for children, it's extremely important. And when you are in many of these refugee situations, sometimes you lose your family. It is frightening if you are 6 years old and you have lost your family. And when you are the humanitarian workers, it is just as much of a mental health problem that you can't find their family. And they're just crying their heart out. So it is both what children see, what they experience. It's that time of quiet. It is what you then do to bring them back. The socialization in a school can make a big difference, so there can be a social cohesion and a healing in the school. So one of the groups that you mentioned, who's missing, sometimes we forget about best friends. But if you have a friend who actually says, how are you? And they care about you, and they know when you're not talking up, when you look anxious, depressed, that's the beginning of getting help. And that's what these children need in some of the worst situations.
Yeah, I love that. Best friends as a stakeholder.
To add to that, I actually had two friends. If I call them at 2 a.m. or something, having a panic attack in the car, they would actually come out and help take care of me and everything. So I totally echo that best friends are someone who is really important for you as well.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, and also I think in relation also to the education system or schools as a stakeholder, the emotional literacy, because many of us, I hear most of the time, I have a friend who's struggling, but I don't know how to help. So I think this needs to be part of the discussion, emotional literacy, realizing when we're dealing with depression or burnout or anxiety, and knowing what tools to use. Would you like to talk about the empathic listening and the Shapers
so we believe that everyone have the power to be empathetic. I think it's in us to be empathetic. It's just that we have forgotten how to be one. And a lot of time we sort of confuse sympathy with empathy. And so what us shapers are trying to do is basically the first line of defense for someone who is about to go into a crisis of mental health breakdown or burnout breakdown is basically to have someone listen to them, and listen to them without judgment, and listen to them without telling them what they need to do, and just listen. Because like you said, art pieces and whatnot is very important. It's just a way for us to express, either through art, through cooking, through talking, and just to have that is very important. And that's why us shapers are working with the Friendship Bench by Dr. Dixon and Inuka to train. Right now we are doing pilot project with 15 shapers from 15 cities around the world, and then we hope to slowly expand it to all of our shapers community. And because for us shapers, as you know, we are considered as high achievers, because we are not just doing our main job, but at the same time we are volunteering our time to make the world a better place. And there's a lot of tasking things that goes on with us, and sometimes for us just to have a shaper friend who understand the immense pressure that we are going on is also very important. So this is going to create that a strong bond and peer-to-peer sort of helping one another out.
Yeah, activism burnout is very important, especially in this culture of young people I'm not in the Forbes 30 under 30 list, so I haven't done anything in my life. So I think it's important to address that. Yes, Professor Farrar, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think rather than asking who should be in the tent, I think it's better to ask, there's no reason why anybody should be outside the tent. I mean, if you're going to create a movement, this can't be about us and them, as you said earlier. It's got to come from those people with lived experience, and it's got to bind everybody in. If there's one thing that WEF does, many things, but if one thing WEF does, it brings together the whole community. You can't deal with this unless we also talk about the workplace. You can't deal with this unless companies engage on it, and not just the pharma companies who may produce products, but everybody, including us as an employer, because that workplace mental health is an issue. It's an issue of health, of course, and well-being, but it's also critically an issue of economic productivity. So this is something that has to bind everybody together. And we all agree that there's no single magic bullet here. It's a holistic approach and it has to be integrated. Absolutely, we're all bought into that. But that's not the same as saying there isn't accountability. And again, the thing at WEF is you come, you have the debates, you have the discussion, and there are people who can make decisions here, and there are people who have great influence. But when you've gone, you've got to go away and commit to delivering what you promised when you were here, because otherwise there's no point coming. And so that's something that's gone through last year. We did this with SEPI many years ago, and we come here, we debate, we discuss, we all agree in the main, we've got to go away, and those of us who are in positions of authority and leadership have then got to make it happen. And if we don't do that, the thing that Richard Edelman, who's sitting over there, talks about trust and accountability is lost. So that's the pressure, I think, that comes back to everybody that's here, saying the right things to make it happen when we leave here.
Yeah, so those stakeholders that we need to bring in to make them accountable. I know that Wellcome Trust is not working in isolation on the 5-year program. So I suppose you already have some stakeholders that you're working with. Do you think there are any missing that maybe for some reason you couldn't reach or who are not part of the discussion and you'd like to?
And you honestly, you don't miss people because you don't want them.
Right.
And one of the reasons for having this session is to actually reach out and say now, with the connectivity we have, please reach out to us. And it doesn't have to be to us. It could be to Henrietta. It could be to the Shapers. It could be anybody in this room. But if you don't bind everybody and keep everybody on the tent, in the tent or on the bus, whichever acronym you want, then we will only address a little part of it. And that won't move the field forward.
Fatima, could I just jump in there?
Of course, yes.
Because I've struggled with this in the last 10 years in Australia as well, because we have had a lot of awareness. We've had massive awareness, actually, of mental ill health and mental illness in Australia. So every Australian would be able to talk more freely now than they could have 10 or 15 years ago. But it's actually caused stagnation of action in some ways, because people think by talking about it, something's being done. You know? And actually, what Jeremy just said is very, very important. There's a real call to action here, not just from the private sector, from World Economic Forum world, which is fantastic. The corporate world is getting engaged with this finally. I'd say it's been very late in the piece, I must say. But World Economic Forum has played a good role here. But government is off the hook in many ways. And even when we have sympathetic ministers and prime ministers, we've had about 5 very sympathetic prime ministers for mental health in Australia. We have had this progress, especially in youth mental health. That's been great progress. But the fact is, we don't have parity. We do not have parity. If you have a mental health problem, you do not get the same access or quality of care, even in rich countries. And that's a fact all around the world. And we have, the high-income countries have got a lot of neglect. So how is that going to change? It has to be driven by the public, by the voters, actually, the voters. And so campaigns are developing, United for Global Mental Health, based in the UK. In Australia, we have Australians for Mental Health. This is a new grassroots movement giving a voice to every single member of the public. That's the goal, because every single member of the public is affected. But if they don't actually indicate that they care about it to the political world, we're not going to see government investment. That's the missing ingredient, I think.
Yeah, so the grand public and voters specifically as a stakeholder, I guess, if we can call it that way. So would you like to touch upon why do you think it was a successful experience in Australia to have the political support of federal governments? Well, how can we replicate this in other countries?
Well, it's very interesting, because I tried for a long time, the first part of my career, to get governments to invest in schizophrenia and psychosis and serious mental illness, which is obviously still pretty neglected. But what really worked was a focus on young people, because everybody can relate to their kids, And we're talking mainly about 12 to 25, teenagers, young adults, on the threshold of adult life. And that's where parents really start to get concerned, and they see the reality of mental ill health. There are mental health problems in little kids, and you mentioned all the risk factors that are operating in the younger children, but the real rubber hits the road once you hit puberty and into that sort of transition to adulthood. And the public care about that. Everyone, we all in the room, we care about that. Politicians care about it. They know it's a reality. So that was successful in mobilising, so in a way, youth mental health was the vanguard for investment. It's happening in other countries too. I mentioned 12 or 15 other countries are starting to get this. Wellcome Trust has actually embraced that very, very strongly, great leadership. So I think this is really starting to be the success story, and hopefully the rest of mental health care can follow. You create some optimism and success, and you get a belief that you can make a difference to people's lives. That's what they do in cancer, even though it's not as successful as you might think.
Yeah.
You know? But the hope and the prospect of success is a very important message for us.
It's really important. I mean, a lot of people, the analogy to cancer, I think, are important. And you know, I've witnessed going through, and people they've had moonshots in cancer. Even Richard Nixon had a moonshot in cancer, and people deride that and say, but actually, I would argue the opposite. It gives a sense of hope, and it gives a sense of energy that actually you can make a difference. And one of the problems that I think is benevolence is we've all been frightened of it. We don't know how to react when our relative, brother, friend, whatever it is, and that makes us fearful. And when we're fearful, we step back away from it, unless you've got very good friends at 2 a.m. like you have. So we have to offer realistic, honest hope that you can actually change something. And I don't think we've had that in this field until recently.
Yeah, I agree.
Could I add to that
Of
one?
course, yes.
So when we're talking to young people around the world, one of the areas for their anxiety is that they don't feel they're getting an education that's modern, and that they're not going to get a job. So it's creating a lot of stress and a lot of depression because they just feel they're going to be locked out. So the World Economic Forum has taken this on about jobs, very important. Another one is on climate. They worry about the world that we are going to be leaving, that they are now in. So if we can solve some of these issues, it will help with mental health. So Jeremy's point about standing up a movement is absolutely right. We have to realize that we're all in it, but we have to be willing to say proudly that we're in it for a movement for mental health, that this is important to all of us. And there are lots of feeders into it, and we can get to some of the root causes together, but we have to solve this.
Yes, definitely. So again, the idea of a holistic approach, mental health does not stand in isolation, but in relation to education and climate change, among other topics. We need to start wrapping up here, and I would like to ask each one of you a question to make this tangible for the audience. So today, what can anyone do to progress youth mental health? And maybe you can talk to just the public about anyone, if you want to talk to government specifically, to industry. We didn't talk too much about the private sector and what they can contribute. If each one of you can have an actionable item. What can I do today to progress?
I think what we all actually can do in this room is to just ask ourselves, am I a good listener? You know, once we ask ourselves, am I a good listener? And if you think you are not, then maybe reach out to someone or some foundation that can educate you on deep listening and active listening to just make yourself become an empathetic listener. And I think that's just the basic question to ask yourself.
Who wants to go next?
Going back to this issue of accountability, it is all of us. It's not going to get done by somebody else. So if you're sitting in this room now, email me in the next few days and join that engagement. We would love to have people engaged with this. My email is available somewhere. Email us and get involved, because you'll make a difference.
Okay, if I might touch upon that, I give my own call to action. I wasn't planning to do that, but it links to your idea. Next month, the World Economic Forum will be launching TopLink, which is the digital platform for collaboration among different stakeholders, so anyone can join and contribute. So this could be an easy way to bring together the public, the governments, the private sector, all the stakeholders who need to be part of the conversation. Director Fore, you want to share?
Well, break the silence is one of the most important things we could do for this generation now, and end the stigma, and invest yourself. Do something about it. Roll up our sleeves. Let's get to work.
Well, I learned something from listening to Jeremy and Henrietta about the need for confidence. You know, I mean, in psychiatry, when I trained in psychiatry, I did general medicine first, and then I moved to psychiatry. I had people queuing up trying to talk me out of that career move. You know, don't waste your life on quote unquote those people. Now that is a disgrace, you know, and that attitude, that lack of confidence. You know, you said let's be proud of this mission that we're all hoping to be committed to. So more confidence, more ambition, and it's got to be a community-wide effort, as Jeremy and Henrietta and Sanju have been saying. So I think we can do it. You know, it's not a moonshot; it's achievable.
Yeah, so, you know, to wrap up and then on this positive message of hope, so we know we can achieve this. There has been some progress made, but definitely there's a lot more to be done. Keep in mind this holistic approach that mental health does not stand in isolation. Again, everybody needs to be part of the conversation because nobody needs to be outside this circle of stakeholders, and holding those stakeholders accountable in order to reach actual impacts and not keep it just at the talking stage. Remembering the message of inclusion as well, so caring for those vulnerable and underrepresented populations. And stigma, of course, this effort needs to continue, you know, in parallel with investing in mental health. And I would like actually to invite you all to watch a video on that, how to break the stigma, and it's for the Speak Your Mind campaign.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm from Melbourne,
Hong Kong,
Colombia.
Canada,
South Africa. England.
Every 40 seconds, someone dies by suicide.
Every time someone dies by suicide, you lose all the brilliance they could have brought into the world.
I personally have struggled with anxiety my whole life.
We need mental health to be taken as seriously as physical health.
I'm calling on my leaders to act on mental health because people in Pakistan and all over the world deserve better.
For too long, there's been stigma attached to talking about mental health and well-being.
Mental health has been neglected for too long. It concerns us all, and greater action is urgent.
The world is speaking. We have the blueprint of what works. It's time to invest in mental health.
It is indeed time to invest, and we hope that you all will contribute to 2020 being the year for investments in mental health. And you have a clear call to action here, so you can contribute by participating in the campaign. I would like to thank all the panelists. That was a delightful discussion that we've had, and this message of hope again that we're giving to anyone who might be struggling. Thank you all.